Elden Ring is the 7th game in a series of challenge-focused RPG games developed by FromSoftware, starting with Demon's Souls in 2009. It stands right now as one of the most influential and culturally significant video games to come out within the 2020s, and is a game that has sparked much discussion and debate in terms of its gameplay, its themes, its ideas, and most importantly, a staple of the FromSoftware company, its challenge. This video and its subsequent parts is intended as a thorough discussion of Elden Ring and its recent expansion, Shadow of the Erdtree. It is intended to explore the way the game is constructed, its ideas, and its gameplay. I'll be discussing as much as the game as I feel like I have the right knowledge to be able to accurately ascertain and convey. I would like to also mention that I'll be discussing to some extent each of the previous games made by FromSoftware, so appropriate spoiler warning here for the content to come, as I will not be holding back on these discussions. If you're watching this without having played any of these games, I would highly recommend playing it beforehand. The moment you first open up Elden Ring, you are met with the title screen, the first indication of one of FromSoftware, and more specifically Hidetaka Miyazaki's, love for recurring ideas and themes in their games. Each of the Soulsborne games, as I will call them, encompassing everything from Demon's Souls to Elden Ring, has the same menu layout, a large central text with the name of the game and a smaller list of relevant options. The most interesting aspect of this menu, however, and the reason I'm even discussing it, is the music. Many before me have noticed this leitmotif, which is eerily similar to the boss fight track played for the Gwyn Lord of Sunlight boss fight in the first Dark Souls. And by extension, the second phase theme for the Soul of Cinder in Dark Souls 3. While the exact notes may be slightly different, it carries the same weight and emotion, as it is something that is immediately recognizable by any who have previous experience with this company's lineup of work. Secondarily to this, and in my opinion more interesting, is the more rambunctious climax of the theme. Which is a similar leitmotif to the menu cinematic present for the first game of Miyazaki's career, Demon's Souls in 2009. Even to the extent of the small drum fill between the individual leitmotifs present within the structure of both tracks. While the one for Elden Ring is slightly more complex, it follows a similar structure of melody, percussion, melody, percussion. This, I believe, is tied to one of the most interesting aspects of Elden Ring, which is that the game is both thematically and mechanically a sort of amalgamation of all the Soulsborne games to precede it. It also provides a sense of familiarity and comfort to existing veteran players, while also providing an excellent high-spirit and epic track to welcome new players and help them establish a basic understanding of the general theme of the game, that of an epic adventure. Epic being used in the traditional sense of being, quote, heroic or grand in scale or character. Once the player makes the choice to start a new game, the option is immediately presented with a series of cards detailing the possible starting classes. This is something that no prior Soulsborne game has done outside of network test versions, and it works in part to establish 1. A list of possible routes that the player could choose to take through the game. The Vagabond with the sword, the hero with the axe, the astrologer and prophet with various magical staffs, etc, etc. 2. Establishes that the choice of your starting class is purely preferential, with the exception of the Wretch, which starts with no form of armament bar a single wooden club and a loincloth. Your choice in starting class is merely a starting point that you can choose to build off in any way. Once you arrive to the character creation screen, you can choose from the wide list of available options to customize your character, and more importantly, choose your starting gift, of which there are many useful options like a talisman that increases your max HP, a small rune item, a golden seed used to increase your flask charges, boiled prawn that temporarily boosts damage negation, and so on and so forth. Once you've done all of this, you are treated to an opening cinematic providing details The first key point is establishing how the world ended up the way it currently is. namely detailing aspects of the lore such as the Night of the Black Knives, the Shattering, and the abandonment of the Greater Will, then interesting names and details of characters that ties their own variants of specifically the Elden Lord ending. The defeat of Hoaraloo, allowing for the default age of Fracture, Fia's questline allowing for the Age of the Duskborn, Goldmask's questline leading to the Age of Order, and the Loathsome Dung Eater quest leading to the Blessing of Despair ending. Gideon Ofnir being also a key member of the Roundtable Hold. This is helpful in guiding the player through the game, and having his presence leads credits to his trustworthiness as a guide throughout the experience. And finally the Tarnished, laying stationary within the fog that acts as a sort of barrier entry to the lands between. It is not entirely clear what the fog is exactly, but it is inferred to be some sort of barrier around the lands between, which is the lands of gods as it were, similar to Lordran in Dark Souls 1. It could also be a metaphorical fog, similar to the fog that the Slayer of Demons must pass through to reach Boletaria in Demon Souls. Its nature is not important, however, as it immediately establishes the player as an outsider, an idea that Miyazaki loves to explore within his narratives. The player character is very rarely from the places that these games explore, usually arriving from distant lands or being revived into worlds sharply different from those they have previously resided. In this cutscene, you can also see the guidance of Grace reaching the Tarnished, which is the guidance of the god of the lands between, namely Queen Marika, along with being explicitly told your eventual goal, though you likely won't understand what it means yet, which is to become Elden Lord. Your character is then spawned into the Chapel of Anticipation, which leads more credence to the idea that the fog is more metaphorical. One interesting theory for the nature of the Chapel of Anticipation is that it acts as sort of a graveyard for Tarnished, waiting to be resurrected by the guidance of Grace, which may very well be the nature of the fog that the player resides in, that being death. For the sake of this video, however, for now, the reason we are here is unimportant. What is important is what immediately is established to the player. The first being the corpse lying on the floor from a dead maiden, presumably our maiden, and on the corpse lies the tarnished wizened finger, which is used to write messages for other players. This immediately established an aspect that has been integral to the Souls games since their inception, which is the idea of community, of players working together to make sense of a world so dense and obtuse, which naturally is hilariously hijacked by players placing messages saying, "jump next to bottomless pits," or "try finger butt hole," behind any NPC that is stationary. This is an interesting aspect of these games, however, as they are one of many ways that FromSoftware makes these games really damn funny. In such a melancholy and lonely experience, small bouts of levity are very helpful for providing a small break from the more somber and serious emotions these games evoke. FromSoftware very much wants the player to engage with the community aspect of this game, however, as it is literally the first item a player will pick up in their experience, establishing from the get-go that you should 1. Use the community to your advantage, and 2. Help to contribute to said community. Next in this small area you find the Grafted Scion, another staple of FromSoftware's work, an elite enemy that you are able to beat but are intended to die to. You can absolutely beat this Grafted Scion, and you will be awarded 3,200 souls, the most of any of this enemy type in the game, along with a fairly strong weapon. However, you still have to die in the progress, falling off the ledge after the fight. Interestingly, you only actually die if you beat the Scion, as falling into the void reduces your health to 0 and provides the "you died" message, which does not happen if you die to the Scion. Instead, your health remains at 1 and the screen fades to black. A short cutscene then plays of 2 of the most important characters in your journey, one namely being Torrent, your steed for the duration of your experience, and Melina, who takes the role of your maiden. Interestingly, she states that
one of his kind is sure to seek the Elden Ring, even if it does violate the Golden Order.
The player is not aware of what these terms mean, however they immediately establish a goal, and a potential issue with that goal. Her use of "even" indicates that the violation of the Golden Order is a profound negative in terms of our current knowledge, and indicates that the Golden Order may very well stand between the Tarnish and their goal of becoming Elden Lord. We are going to skip ahead a little now and open the door and arrive on the doorstep of the lands between, engaging with a staple of FromSoftware and their love for revealing absolutely stunning views. And this reveal has more uses than just the player wondering at its sheer spectacle. This is also a fantastic teaching moment. When you walk through the door, you will likely immediately interact with the Site of Grace, as they are established to be the game's checkpoint system. And then looking upon the world, we can see the biggest strength of this game in terms of its world design, and that it wordlessly conveys exactly what you should do. The NPC Vare will tell you explicitly the function of the Guidance of Grace and the overarching current goal of reaching Stormvale Castle, but more importantly is how the structure of presentation establishes an immediate list of options. See, when designing a game, specifically one of this nature, it's essential that you can accurately communicate to the player their immediate available options. This establishes an appeal to both people intrinsically and extrinsically motivated. One who is intrinsically motivated will likely drop into the world and immediately understand how to engage with it, exploring and getting more powerful as the developers intended. The game establishes that there is a lakeside area to the east where one can explore if they desire. But if they want a more linear path to follow while they gain their bearings, there is the Tree Sentinel and the Church of Ella. This designates two immediate goals, with the goal of the Tree Sentinel being to teach the player that if there is any struggle that the player has reached where they don't feel they have the necessary skills/equipment to overcome, then there is the option to go away and come back, which then leads the player onto the Church of Ella, which possesses a grace checkpoint, a friendly merchant, and an upgrade material. On the cliff to the left is Stormvale Castle. This is the game telling you your current immediate eventual goal, the location that is currently your main objective, to tackle and complete that dungeon. On the horizon is the long-term eventual goal, a goal that you see as the culmination of your journey. This is where you will get to eventually. This tiered hierarchical view allows the player to infer a linear progression path that they can choose to follow or ignore based upon their personal preference. In the Church of Ella, the grace checkpoint reinforces the idea of following the guidance. See, there is no direct line of sight to the gatefront, where you will receive your spectral steed, so you have to trust the grace to point you in the correct direction. The player along this path will likely be drawn to a small fire with a weaker enemy. This immediately reinforces two ideas. One, that it was a good idea to avoid the Tree Sentinel, and this current enemy is significantly closer to your power level. And two, it will likely cause a player to stop their running and increase their odds of engaging with the small brazier, marking the entrance to the first cave the player will engage in, with a relatively easy boss and a somewhat useful item that can be dropped from it. This is clever, because it is immediately a way to increase your power level, even if by a small amount, and also to indicate that you're on the right path, and that you can find more of these scattered throughout the world that you can choose to engage with to increase your power or to acquire items. Past the cave is the grave front site of Grace, where the game very much opens up to the player. But most importantly, here is where you talk to Melina, who will enable the ability to level up, providing access to your mount, and most importantly, reinforce exactly what your goal is, that being to reach the Erd Tree. And this is where the player is really let loose upon the world, and it is where I will discuss how Limgrave, the area, is so delightfully well constructed and guides you through an open world experience in such an effective manner. First off, directly in front of you, you have the Gatefront Ruins, where you can access two weapons, a map fragment, and a whetstone blade, along with a large group of enemies. These enemies can be engaged via stealth, full-on combat, mounted combat, ranged combat, and a myriad of other interesting ways, or they can all be just avoided, if the player so decides. More interestingly is the road leading through the ruins and the map fragments available. See, this enables two ways to engage with the open world if simply running in a direction isn't a style that you particularly enjoy. The map of Elden Ring is very good because it establishes A. Possible points of interest scattered throughout the map, small caves with orange outlines indicating tunnels of upgraded materials being a good example. B. Telescopes where players can get an aerial view and allow the player to see in 3 dimensions possible points of interest. C. Pretty much every minor point that one can engage with, paired up with a tagging feature that marks areas on your map and your GUI, places like small ruins and everjails. D. Paths that may lead to points of interest not explicitly marked, like the ravines, the winding paths and roads, settlements, and once the fog lifts with enough exploring, map fragments. Most importantly, a central highway leading down the center. This highway is incredible from a game design standpoint because it leads directly to the Weeping Peninsula, which seems to be where the developers intend the player to go first. It also acts as an anchor point of sorts. The highway is familiar, the highway is comfortable. If you see something in the distance you want to explore, you have the highway right behind you that you can come back to. This road enables exploration so excellently because it helps players construct the map in their heads of where any given location is. There are numerous unique landmarks along the route that the player can use to accurately assess where a given location is and its location relevance to other locations. Following the path to its conclusion will lead you to Castle Morn and the wider Weeping Peninsula, which, as stated before, contains many flask upgrades, small caves and catacombs, points of interest, bosses, and merchants. We will get to Castleborn here in a second, however, because there is a second highway up from the Gatefront ruins in Stormhill that leads you into the second half of Limgrave, which contains the wondrous Physic, the elevator to Shiofra, a small fort, and the entrance to Caelid, along with flask upgrades. Along your exploration, you will traverse a lot of the open world, and here is where Torrent really shines as a traversal mechanic, as the game separates itself from other open worlds in both density and verticality. In Skyrim, for example, your movement is for the most part entirely confined to your own two legs, and as such, traversal doesn't have very many options, as you are limited to what you can see and the capabilities of your character. Torrent is so incredible because, along with shifting out the field of view of the game ever so slightly, allowing you to see more, he also is an engaging method of traversal because he has a double jump, and the game lets you use that double jump. The verticality in the almost fractured nature of the open world allows countless opportunities to jump over small ledges, pieces of large stone buried in the ground, the stone coffin fixtures sticking out of the cliff faces, and even walls around various points of interest. This creates an engaging sense of traversal, because not only is the world jam-packed with content, but the actual movement through the world is made more engaging. This solves the inherent problem with moving the Dark Souls formula to an open world, as in the Soulsborne games preceding, the engagement throughout the world had been made interesting from interesting connections, dynamic environments, and enemy placement. This is an idea that will very much carry over into the legacy dungeons, but is an idea that is very hard to carry over to an open world fixture. This is what makes Elden Ring's open world so widely beloved, and why it is considered one of the best open worlds in games. You have a world that in terms of actual area is a lot smaller than other open worlds, but instead focuses the experience of providing a dense set of options, conveys those options in an effective way, and guides players through the experience and provides a means of traversal that is engaging. There is more to the open world, however. There is the interconnectedness of it, and how it expands more and more as the player progresses, but we will discuss that more in detail in subsequent parts. Just know for now that as of entering the game, every single part of the open world up until Leyndell is currently accessible to the player without killing a single boss. Now, back to Castle Morn. This is the first legacy dungeon you will encounter. Well, I say legacy dungeon, but it is a little too small to be considered an actual legacy dungeon. But it's an effective tool for teaching the player how these areas will function, and once you feel equipped to beat this area, then you will most likely be ready to face the Guardian of Stormvale, Margit. The dungeon is effective because it allows players to A. increase their power level along with the peninsula outside of it, B. provides an interesting experiential dynamic, with the open courtyard, the ramparts, the small jumping puzzle leading down to the back half, and the beachside area where you fight Leonin Misbegotten. Leonin Misbegotten is a fight that, while being very good, falls short in its ability to teach the player how to engage with the combat of this game, in the same way that the Erdtree Burial Watchdog also fails in the catacombs elsewhere in Limgrave. This is a topic tied to the most contentious aspect of Elden Ring and its biggest mistake, which is in regards to its combat, and more importantly, the biggest mistake that was made with this game, and that is Spirit Ashes. And I am not saying Spirit Ashes are the problem at all. In fact, outside of Mimic Tear, they are, for the most part, fairly well balanced. They are useful tools with appropriate staggering of upgrade materials and a power curve that on a standard playthrough will usually match the players. No, the issue with Spirit Ashes is their use of a scapegoat for FromSoftware's biggest mistake in this game, and that is communication of how the combat is meant to be played. In Bloodborne, most players will quickly realise within the first 2 hours of play that this game is not Dark Souls. Its use of the rally mechanic and the fast, frantic boss movesets will very quickly teach the player that the focus should not be on the almost turn-based combat of Dark Souls, the enemy move, your move style of play. But instead you should push every opening you can possibly find, and it is the only game in the series where getting hit is not a sign of subpar play. A skilled player can tank a hit, which will then open up the ability to get a substantial counter hit in place, which then can be used to replenish the health you lost. Sekiro is the same, with Genichiro Ashina being the point where a lot of players either bounce off the game or learn how to play it properly. A heavy focus on deflection and posture, as opposed to the dodge and hit style of gameplay of Dark Souls. These games had the advantage, however, of being visually very distinct from Dark Souls. Elden Ring looks like Dark Souls 4. It has animations lifted from previous games, its mechanics are similar, its weapons and armaments are the same. This game feels very similar to Dark Souls 3, but open world with a jump button. And this isn't even the problem with the game's combat. It's a culmination of these factors. See, Elden Ring is meant to be approached differently to Dark Souls. In that game, you are intended to let the boss get through its wave of attacks before getting yours in, and if you play Elden Ring like that, you're not going to have a fun time. This coupled with the use of delayed attacks that punish panic rolling. The game is most fun when you realize these factors, and you pay attention to tells in delayed attacks to get your roll timings right, and you focus on hitting the enemy during their combo, not after. If you try to play this game like Souls, then it's probably not going to be very much fun. You're going to spend a lot of time dodging attacks and not very much time hitting the enemy. Instead, you want to use the posture system, guard counters, jumping attacks, and try to weave through their combos and find openings during those combos, not after. FromSoftware does not do a good job of teaching this to the player. Granted, it's a very difficult task, and it is inherently difficult in a game focused on the wide use of options with such a broad array of playstyles. And a lot of players don't learn this approach to combat. Instead, they look at the game, think it's Dark Souls, play it like Dark Souls, and become frustrated when the game is not as fun. And that's where Spirit Ashes come into the picture, because Spirit Ashes are the most unique approach this game takes to combat. A summonable helper that can split boss aggro, help with whittling down the health bar, and can even be summoned in some world segments. So this false misconception has cropped up that the game is balanced around you having the Spirit Ashes, and the game is forcing you to play with them, which is incorrect. I won't say there aren't issues with some of the bosses, combat, and scaling, but those issues I'll get to more in subsequent parts. But for the most part, bar a few select moves from certain boss fights, the bosses aren't poorly tuned, they aren't tuned for Spirit Ashes. It's just FromSoftware did a pretty poor job of teaching players how to engage with this experience. This is where I will leave this video for now. I intend to make follow-up parts if this video does well, but until that point, thank you all very much for watching, and have a fantastic rest of your day.